Hello everybody, welcome back to Art Appreciation. So for Module 4, in case you didn't read the instructions, you're going to watch 3 of the 5 videos. You don't have to watch all of them. If you do watch 4 or all of them, you get 5 bonus points for each additional video that you watch and take notes on. And you'll just submit those notes with these. Make sure you distinguish which video, where each video starts and ends. So for this one, put like architecture and then start your notes on your paper. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to email me and let me know. So this one is architecture, so let's get into it. So our first work of art is the Lion Gate. This is a Mycenaean work of art. So this uses dry masonry or ashlar masonry. So basically what that means is there's no mortar in between these blocks. They are just perfectly put together, carved to fit perfectly together. Sometimes things like an indention and a groove are used to keep the stone steady. Sometimes they're just perfectly carved to sit into one another. So there is no any kind of mortar gluing these together. This is the main entrance to a Bronze Age citadel in Mycenae in southern Greece. So the citadel was located on the northwestern side of the Acropolis. I know that's a lot of big words. Basically, this is a gate into a raised area where most of the town took place. This gate is known for its low relief sculptures of 2 lions above the gate. So that's where it gets its name. We have a lion on either side of a column. And this is your typical Doric column. This relief is considered the only known monumental piece of Mycenaean sculpture and the largest known sculpture in the prehistoric Aegean. So the Aegean is the area. This gate's designed using post and lintel structure, and we'll talk more about this in a second. So the lions here are thought to represent some sort of goddess. They may have also been sort of a warning to people entering the gate. So this would have been people coming into town, maybe not necessarily people that live here. So guests visiting, coming in. So ashlar masonry doesn't use any mortar. So now we're going to talk about post and lintel. So this is Stonehenge. It was created about 3000 to 2000 BCE. So let's talk about those BCE dates real quick while we're here. I do talk about it in sculpture video as well, but I don't know which ones y'all are going to watch, so I'm going to talk about it anyway. If you have already watched it in sculpture, you can kind of skip ahead. So BCE dates work. We have BCE, which is before Common Era, and CE, which is Common Era. So if you think about a number line in math, we have 0 in the center. So anything before 0 in a number line is negative. Those are going to be our BCE dates. So they count the same way. So we start at 0, and as we move backwards in time, if we're 3,000 years before 0, that's going to be 3000 BCE. Just like our today's date is 2026. So that's 2026 years after 0. So those kind of work as our positive numbers work on the number line. I hope that makes sense. So BCE is before 0. CE, which is Common Era, is after 0. Okay, back to Stonehenge. So Stonehenge is an example of post and lintel design. So each vertical stone or monolith functions as a post, and each horizontal stone functions as a lintel. So our posts are up and down, our lintels are left to right. This is a very common and functional form of architecture, and we still use that form of architecture today. We might not necessarily use it with stone in a circle, but we do use the post and lintel ideas today. So for Stonehenge, the post and lintels of the outer ring are held together with tongue and grooves, not just gravity. So we have sort of a piece that juts up, and we have a hole that fits into to hold the pieces on. Obviously, some pieces have fallen off, and we are missing some. There are some that are just laid around where they have fallen off. But the idea was those posts would help keep those up. In the case of Stonehenge, the posts are arranged in a circular shape around a central space. There are 2 rings of circles as well as other stones interspersed. So we have the inner ring, we have the outer ring. And they're both post and lintel designs. And you can see here a lot of the fallen stones around. This is not the only hinge in existence, although it is one of the most popular, if not the most well-known. They were quite common during this period of time in all different locations, not just in Europe. So, in case you didn't know, Stonehenge is in Wiltshire, England. A lot of people think ancient, they think like Greece, Rome, the Mediterranean. This is in England. So, many hinges were made of wood. So, over time, wood rots. It's ephemeral, it goes away. So, even if they did exist, we don't really have them anymore. The reason that we still have this one is because it was made of stone. Scholars believe that this hinge, and many like it, were used as a form of calendar, and it functions sort of like a sundial. The sun does hit at certain places during certain times of the year, including solstices and equinoxes, so that sort of confirms that theory. Ritual events would have likely taken place here at certain times of the year and may have included processions or dances through and around the stones. And it's probably used to know when to plant and to celebrate harvest. So people didn't have calendars like we do. They didn't have a calendar hanging on the wall. They didn't have a watch that they could just look at. At this time, they didn't even have clocks. So this sort of would function as that. There'd probably be a person that was designated to come check it, if not every day, then at certain points at irregular intervals to say, okay, we're nearing when we need to plant. We're nearing when we need to harvest. Things are going to get cold again. The sarsen stones used at Stonehenge come from about 15 miles north of the site, and the blue stone in the center came from even further away than that. So these are the blue stones. These are the sarsen stones around the edge. So this tells us that the people, this was very important. This was a very important site. 15 miles today doesn't feel like a very long distance. We have cars. We can move really fast. Think about walking 15 miles one way. Then you get there and you've got to walk another 15 miles back while dragging a very large rock. This is Bronze Age. A lot of people believe that the wheel did not exist at this time. Even if they didn't have the wheel, they probably still rolled this on logs or something of that sort. But even if they did just drag it, that's 15 miles. That it would have taken a very long time. It would have been very difficult work. So that tells us that these stones were important, that this place was important, that the purpose of this was important enough to put in effort to go get the stones and bring them back. So, important things here, post and lintel. Next, we're going to talk about the arch. So arches have become a very important part of architecture. The main part of the arch, the main thing that holds it together, is the keystone. So this piece up at the top keeps it from falling in. A lot of arches are actually held together with weight and gravity and pressure. So each piece pushes against the one beside it to keep it from collapsing inward. A lot of ancient arches are actually not held together with any kind of mortar. They're just using physics to stand up. It's really neat. We do have some famous arches. So this is the Arch of Titus. This Arch of Titus inspired other arches of this type to be made and became an influence for the use of a large arch as a monument. So this arch was commissioned by the Emperor Domitian after the death of his older brother Titus. It's meant to commemorate Titus's official deification and the victory of Titus, together with their father Vespasian, over the Jewish rebellion in Judea. I don't know. Yes, I do. So it does have inner reliefs that sort of tell you what's going on. So here we have a relief of the triumphal procession. It was celebrated in 71 CE after the Roman victory, culminating in the fall of Jerusalem. So it contains one of the few contemporary depictions of the artifacts of Herod's temple. So some believe it has the last depiction of the Ark of the Covenant before it was lost. So the Ark of the Covenant is a Jewish and Christian artifact. It's been lost for thousands of years at this point. So this is sort of believed to be the last depiction of it, of what it may have actually looked like. So it tells what the arch is for up at the top. So this is arch for commemoration. We're going to see arches in architecture a lot. But this sort of, we have triumphant arches in France. We have triumphant arches. I think there's some in England. There were talks recently of one being built in the U.S. So all of these were sort of based off of this prototype. This was the first. So this is the Basilica of Saint Denis. It's in France. And you notice we're moving forward in time. So this basilica was first built around the year 475 CE, but it was added on to over the years. In the 12th century, Gothic additions were made that made the cathedral what it's known for today. So 12th century, that's going to be the 1100s. The choir of the basilica was completed in 1144 CE and is thought to be the first structure to employ all of the elements of Gothic architecture. On the outside, we see the Gothic flying buttresses. So flying buttresses support the weight of the walls and the roof. So we have a lot of windows. That's one of the main things that Gothic architecture is known for, is stained glass windows. Windows glass cannot support weight. So when you're building with stone is very strong. Don't get me wrong, but it can only support so much weight. That's not a great picture. I'm looking for I thought I had another one. I don't. Okay. You can see down here, there's very thin pieces of stone holding up a very heavy stone ceiling. Yes, the ceiling is stone. So, in order to support the weight of the roof and the ceilings inside, we have to have something else support that weight, because these little thin pieces between the windows are just not enough. That's where the flying buttresses come in. So the flying buttresses are arches that come off of the building that help pull the weight of the roof and help support the weight of the roof. They're pulled back from the building to allow light in to get into those windows. So this is what allowed those windows to exist, these flying buttresses. Without them, the whole thing would collapse. So from the exterior, you don't see these windows as much, because the flying buttresses sort of block a little bit of your view. On the interior, we see a vaulted ceiling. This one's going to be a groin vault. So groin vaults are pointed arch that sit against each other. So we have pointed arches here. Pointed arches are characteristic of Gothic architecture. Groin vaulted ceilings help break up some of the sound and echo. This is a ginormous space. This is huge. You can see the little people in comparison to the height of the ceiling. So any sound is going to just extremely echo. So the pointed arches, the groin vaults, all of that helps break up sound. It also helps disperse light coming in through these upper windows. We'll talk more about Gothic cathedrals when we talk about the Gothic era, the medieval era. I think that's the next module, so soon. Now we're going to talk about the Colosseum. So the construction of, this is in Rome, Italy. This is part of the Roman Empire. It's one of the most famous Roman works. The construction of the Colosseum began under the Emperor Vespasian in 72 AD. And yes, this is the same Vespasian that the Arch of Titus, this was Titus's father. It was completed actually under Titus in 80 AD. So the same Titus that we had an arch about finished the construction of the Colosseum. It was originally named the Flavian Amphitheater. And that's because that was the family. Titus, Vespasian, and Domitian, they were all Flavians. It's built of travertine limestone, tuff, which is a volcanic rock, and brick-faced concrete. So concrete is what made the construction of such a large building possible. Again, look at the little people in the picture compared to how massive this thing is. At this time, we didn't have things like rebar. We didn't have metal in construction. It's all stone and concrete. Concrete was a lighter weight than stone, but it was much stronger. You could also use it and sort of mold it into the shape that you wanted it to be in without having to carve it. Roman concrete differs from the concrete of today. So Roman concrete is self-healing. Which is really cool. If it does crack, usually once it rains, it'll heal itself, which is really neat. Modern concrete does not do that. For a very, very long time, we lost the recipe for Roman concrete. People stopped using it. It sort of fell out of fashion with the bringing in of Gothic architecture. They didn't need concrete. So then in the modern era, we made concrete again, but we couldn't really figure out how the Romans did it. We sort of made a new recipe. There's been a lot of research recently about how Roman concrete works and how to make it. We have all the pieces, we just don't know how to put them together. So think about if you're baking a cake. If you've got eggs and flour and milk, you can mix all those things together. You can put them in the oven. But baking it for 200 degrees is very different from baking it at 400 degrees. Is different from baking it for 350 degrees. And if you bake it for 15 minutes versus an hour. So it's all of the order in which things should be put together and the order in which things sit and how they are made that we don't understand. We have the components, we just don't know how to put them together to make the thing. So outside the Colosseum, we have a series of arches. These are called a colonnade or an arcade. So arcade is a series of arches. So the Colosseum is done in different levels. So on the bottom, we'll talk more about this when we talk about ancient art next module. But on the bottom, we have Doric columns, which are the simplest columns. Then we have Ionic columns, which have these little scrolls, which is like a little decorative, but not super decorative. At the top, we have Corinthian columns. They're very decorative. They have leafy figures up at the top. This was sort of to divide the classes. So at the bottom, we would have the poorer people, the people who didn't have a lot of money, the lower classes. Front row seats were a little bit dangerous at the Colosseum because of the things that went on here. So your poorer people typically had the front row seats. It's very exciting until a lion jumps over into the crowd, or a gladiator shoots a bow and it ends up hitting somebody in the crowd. The likelihood of it hitting somebody way up here, an emperor or a high-ranking aristocrat, was very slim. Even your middle class had less sort of danger, but your lower class was right in it. So here's the inside. It would have had a wooden floor, and it did have all these tunnels underneath. The tunnels held gladiators, they held animals. The whole thing could be emptied, and then the floor flooded to reenact sea battles. And they did do that. It probably had some kind of fabric covering that could be opened and closed as needed. So very, very fancy. And all of it was because they had concrete and arches. Next, we're going to talk about the Pantheon. So the Pantheon is a former Roman temple, and since 609 AD, the Catholic Church. It is cylindrical with a rectangular portico with large granite Corinthian columns. So again, Corinthian has the sort of leafy bits. It's called Pantheon because Pantheon is multiple gods. Multiple gods were worshipped here, so it's called the Pantheon. It wasn't a temple for any one Roman god. It was a temple for them all. So we have dentils here, these little sort of square things. They're called dentils. We have the porch or portico here. We have a pediment here at the top, the pointed part. The most important thing is the dome inside the Pantheon. So it's a coffered dome, so C-O-F-F-E-R-E-D, coffered. That's those little square carved in places. So coffers help reduce the weight of the dome on the walls below and help to reduce echo within the rotunda. So the rotunda is the round part of the building. At the top of this dome, we have an oculus. So the oculus lets light in. And these coffers also sort of help bounce light around. The oculus at this time, we didn't have plate glass. The Romans didn't really use glass that we know of. But either way, we do know that the oculus did not have glass. Plate glass was not available until the 19th century. Really late 19th century, early 20th century. So even if they did, it would have been little squares of glass put together. And there's no evidence of that. So this is open. This is a hole. So the really cool thing is the floor on the inside of the Pantheon is sloped slightly towards the edges of the room. And at the edges of the room are little drains. So when it rains and all the water comes in the oculus, they all drain towards the edges of the room to keep everything dry. I think that's really, really smart. Things that a lot of people don't think to do today. So those drains still work today. They actually drain into the sewage system underneath Italy, which is really cool. Oh, I thought I had a cross section, but I don't. So this dome is made with concrete. Again, Roman concrete. Concrete's lighter weight than stone. So it's thinner at the top and it's thicker at the bottom. And by that I mean the density of the wall. So you can see the depth here. But this depth is a lot deeper between the bottom of the dome and the exterior wall. On the outside, it actually has sort of stair steps leading up, and that's to help support the weight from the part that goes over the room. The walls down below are very, very thick, and that's to help support the weight. So we didn't have flying buttresses at this time yet. Okay. Moving on to wooden frameworks. So this is an example of a medieval wood frame house. And again, what do we see? Post and lintel design again. So wood has been used to build homes since the beginning of time. It's renewable, it's easily available, and it's cheap. So anybody that lived in a place that had trees built from wood. You built from the materials around you. So wood was very common. A lot of places are forested. So this is an example of a medieval peasant house. It has wooden walls with plaster. It has a stone foundation and a thatched roof. So again, using the things that are around them. The framing in the walls is balloon framing. Builders created a grid of wooden beams and filled them with smaller wood slats and plaster. So you can see that here in this roof. We have the small and wooden slats. They're filled with plaster in between. The roof is created using trusses. That's what you see here with these beams. And so it points so that water and things can run off the top. It keeps water away from the house. Remember, this is made of wood. Wood in water does bad things. It molds, it rots, it swells. We don't want that. So one of the important things was keeping water away from the house, away from the wood. So that's why we have the stone foundation. So the things that are directly touching the ground are not wood. Then we have this thatched roof to pull water, push it away from the house. And we still use that concept today. Usually you have a block or concrete foundation. Then your roof is sloped with a piece that goes over to push water away from the house. The trusses also help push the weight out again, keep the weight contained. So today's wooden balloon frame construction looks a little bit different. We typically have our vertical pieces or posts closer together. Again, this is post and lintel design again. We do have more room for windows. Not that they didn't use windows. They weren't building with stone, so they could use windows. We use different materials to cover the frame. So they used plaster in between their boards, their pieces of wood. We typically leave that open if we do put something that's insulation. We cover the outside with things like brick. We have plastic siding. We have concrete siding now. We had siding from recycled plastic. We have all different kinds of options. We do cover it with wood. On the inside, we still use plaster, but we have things like paneling and sheetrock. And then again, wood to cover the inside. We don't see the frame. In the medieval houses, we saw the frame from the outside, but we don't anymore with modern construction. Usually we only see the frame if there's an open beam style ceiling. But even that is sort of out of style again. And if you do see it, it's typically not the actual frame of the house. It's a constructed frame to look pretty. It's not functional. In the modern day, industrialization has allowed for new building materials and techniques. So one of those is the use of cast iron. So this is the Crystal Palace. It was designed by Joseph Paxton, and it was built in 1851. It was destroyed in 1936. The Crystal Palace was cast iron and plate glass. It was originally built in Hyde Park, London, and it was built to house the Great Exhibition of 1851, which displayed technologies produced during the Industrial Revolution. Sheet glass was not possible until the industrialization, so the use of machines allowed for better consistency when creating glass, which allowed for large sheets to be made. The Crystal Palace was the greatest area of glass ever seen in a building at this point of its creation. After the exhibition, the palace was relocated to an area of South London known as Penge Place. It was destroyed by fire there in 1936. So the use of prefabricated cast iron allowed the building to be taken apart and reassembled in a different location. It's all pieces of cast iron bolted together, so they could undo the bolts, move it somewhere else, put all the bolts back in together. We still use prefabrication. We just typically don't use cast iron anymore. We usually use steel now. Cast iron was stronger and weighed less than stone, which allowed for the use of less material, which allowed for use of glass. Remember what I said when we talked about the medieval buildings, or the Gothic architecture. Glass can't hold weight. It breaks. So it doesn't have to here. We have this metal frame that holds everything in. All of your weight is in the metal. However, the problem with this is cast iron is more susceptible to heat than stone or steel, which we have later. Steel is not used at this time. So, when the building caught fire in 1936, the iron was damaged beyond repair. Next, we have the Wainwright Building. This was created in 1891 in St. Louis, Missouri. At 10 stories, this building is considered one of the first skyscrapers. The building was commissioned by Ellis Wainwright at a St. Louis brewer. The building is built in 3 parts based on the classical column. So we have base, shaft, and capital. He did this in order to emphasize the height of the building. The frieze at the top below a cornice works as the capital of the building. So this is the cornice. This is the frieze. The frieze is the decorated part. It has these little round windows. So even in the attic space, there's light coming in. Steel frame construction allowed for this building to be built, as well as the resurgence of concrete. Again, we had concrete coming back at this time. The strength and weight of the materials allowed for the structure to be able to be built up without being built out. Louis Sullivan is famously quoted as saying, "Form ever follows function." So we want it to be tall, we make it look like a column. So steel frame construction that carries most of our weight and allows for those windows. And then we also have concrete. So it's not stone. It is actually concrete. Next we have the Bauhaus. So this was 1926 to 27. This was designed by Walter Gropius. And it's in Weimar, Germany. The Bauhaus was built using steel construction where beams were made on the interior of the building and all walls were curtain walls. Curtain walls are non-weight bearing walls. So all of the weight was held internally. This allowed the exterior walls to be mostly sheet glass. They aren't supporting any weight. We can see bits of that sort of weight-bearing pieces here. Everything sort of is vertical posts on the inside that are big steel beams. And then the floor is supported by that as well. So the Bauhaus was created to house the German art school of the same name, which was grounded in the idea of creating I'm so sorry, I'm going to butcher this German word, Gesamtkunstwerk, or comprehensive artwork in which all of the arts would eventually be brought together. So the Bauhaus had great influence on the modern art movement and the future of architecture. And our last one is the Seagram Building. It was designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe and Philip Johnson in 1958. So the Seagram Building is another example of steel frame construction. Similar to the cast iron construction, it utilizes a frame made from steel with panes of glass in between. This allows for more natural light and taller building capabilities. This building is 38 stories tall. So Mies van der Rohe is well known for his quote, "Less is more." So it's not very decorative. We don't have a lot of additional decorations. It's very sleek and very modern and very minimalistic. It is just tall. So that's it for architecture. If you haven't already, make sure you go back and watch 2 more. And if you have any questions, send me an email.